Thank you for tuning in to this special edition of Justice Watch. I am Rosa Nunez here with our very own host, attorney Zulu Ali. We are here to talk about the cost and consequences of fighting for justice. When you talk about race and how, different kind of groups have been trying to fight to be included in this Constitution and be included in this country, as a Black lawyer, what are the conflicts that you've faced, trying to really fight for justice and be there for your clients, and also trying to be an officer of the court?
I mean, it's really, really difficult because what you're doing is that you have a system of justice in America that has systematically, oppressed Black people.
Yes.
And, the system basically, as an officer of the court, then in many ways you stand to be somewhat of an instrument that assists in some way of that oppression. Right? I mean, it doesn't make any difference what position that you have. Like, for example, the President of the United States.
Yes.
And let's just say during the Obama administration, you had a Black man that was the President of the United States. And even though you had a Black man that was the President of the United States, you continue to have the same type of discrimination. And some may argue you had more discrimination that was going against, and oppression that was going against people of color during his administration. Because it's not it's a system.
Of course.
And it's almost like it's almost like a machine.
Yeah.
Right? And once you build, let's say you build a machine that makes wrenches. And then you decide that now we want to make screwdrivers. You use the same machine.
Yeah.
It's still going to produce wrenches.
Yeah, of course.
Regardless. And that's kind of what happens when you're talking about a court system that has, it's the routine that African Americans are not given the same type of justice as other individuals. That's the way the system works. And just because you have an individual that's put into that system doesn't mean that individual is going to change the output, right?
That makes perfect sense.
And so whether you're talking about Black judges, for example, we know there was a situation with a judge that basically brought to light the whole idea that a prosecutor was systematically excluding Black jurors, and actually ended up getting suspended for 6 months because of that. I think his name was it's Olu Stevens, or Judge Stevens in Missouri. He was an African American. Because what was wrong with that? Because as a judge, you're not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
Because that interferes with the system of justice. And as a result of that, he was suspended for 6 months for doing that. And so, I think that when you're talking about as a Black man who is in a situation who really wants to change things and challenge things, then you're going to have issues with the system. The system, because the system isn't made that way.
Yeah.
So it's a very difficult situation to be in, because you're going to be subject to constant judicial scrutiny and sanctions, because if you choose to make a difference in the lives of people, a real difference, then you're going to have a problem.
Of course.
Right? There's no way of avoiding it, because the system is made a particular way. And when you begin to start challenging that, or saying, you know what, I'm going to file a motion. I'm going to bring to light the fact that there's there happens to be a predominantly or almost all white jury, and my defendant happens to be African American or Mexican American, and he deserves a jury of his peers. And if you bring that to their attention, then, there could be some pushback, right? They may not, like that. So what if the judge says, you know what, it doesn't agree with you? Then are you supposed to just shut up and allow it to happen? Or or if you become vocal and be an advocate for your client? So there's a thin line between being a zealous advocate and being disrespectful to the court.
Wow.
Right? So, because that's a very subjective idea. If you tell, if the judge denies your motion, you're saying, I want to strike this jury because it doesn't look like my client, and I don't believe he's going to get a fair trial because it doesn't represent a cross section of the community. And then the judge denies it, and you continue to argue the issue, then you're not supposed to be there. Bring me somebody that's going to allow this system to continue to do what it normally does, and that is to be unfair and unjust to black and brown people, which is the way, that's part of our system.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And it makes perfect sense that you say, that it's, if you're being an officer of the court, they're trying to make you to cater to the needs of the system. Right. But as a person of color, you're really trying to fight for justice for your client. Right. And in doing so, you explain how you run into this thin line of crossing the line over to protect your client or being that officer of the court. Right. And I guess my question is, what is your purpose and what really kind of inspires you to fight for justice in such a system?
For me personally, I believe that we all have a purpose. Yes. And oftentimes, we did a documentary called Purpose and Freedom, mm-hmm. and it was really about an experience that I had because it is frustrating. It is frustrating realizing that the system is not going to allow you to make changes unless you're willing to get bumps, bruises, scratches, and death, potentially death. Yeah. That's the nature of the game. And sometimes you ask yourself, once you go down that road, why are you doing this? And I remember that I had this dream, and in this dream, in this particular case that I was dealing with, after one of my clients was ridiculed and completely disrespected by a judge in her case, I had a dream and I was just really fed up with it. And honestly, I felt like I was done. Never quit, because I don't think I'll ever quit, but I just felt like I was done. And I remember in this dream, I saw myself in this cemetery in Lynchburg, Tennessee, and I was at the gravestone of my grandfather and my grandmother, and I could see them, they were standing there. And my grandfather was sitting there, he was very stoic, he wasn't saying anything, and my grandmother was there, and I was talking to her about, what am I doing this for? Yeah. And, I remember that she began to, the song that she used to sing to me, it was a Mahalia Jackson song. It was called Hold On. Her version of it was Glory is Coming. Keep your eye on the prize, glory is coming. And she says, it's not your glory, it's their glory. Yeah. So I began to understand that basically sometimes your purpose is not necessarily your prize, but sometimes it's other people's prize. And I've never had a situation where I went through this process where somebody did not benefit from it. Yeah. And so in other words, there's other individuals that are benefiting from, what I have to go through and what I'm doing. But, and it kind of rejuvenated me and kind of made me realize that, that was really my purpose. My purpose was to come into this world and to touch other people.
Wow, it's truly inspiring to hear that you feel like your purpose, it's in a way something bigger than yourself. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's truly amazing and inspiring to hear, because I feel like you don't really hear that often. Right. You really hear the small talk kind of response of, I'm a lawyer because of the money, or I'm a lawyer because I just want to have that kind of character and be known as that. But it's truly inspiring to hear that you're working for something bigger than yourself. Right. And to know that you're willing to take the punches for your clients, you're willing to take that hit because it's something greater. It's going to be something greater in the end. Right. And I feel like we've talked about a little bit about race and how that comes into play with the system and how it's really in charge of really oppressing individuals in a way. And I wanted to ask, why do you think the system in itself has been formulated in such a way to continue oppressing a certain group of people?
Right. I mean, I think that, it is fear. I mean, again, it's not fear of like physical fear. I don't think they fear that the person is going to do anything to them. I don't really believe that. I think it could be the byproduct in some circumstances as to why people feel that way. But I think it's a bigger fear as to who you can become. And I think that, humanity is, humanity never ceases to disappoint me. Because you kind of, for me personally, I was always raised from the perspective that everyone is trying to get when you're trying to do good or be good, then that's really what we live for.
Yeah.
But the reality of it is that we live in a very selfish world. And I think that when people basically fall into 5 basic types of categories. One are people who are inspired or are moved by comfort. All they want to do is just be comfortable. The second group of individuals are people, I call them that are moved by acceptance. All they want to do, and we see those people, they have inferiority complexes and they just want to be accepted. The third are the type of individuals that want recognition and prestige, right? And we know those individuals where, prestige is good, recognition, they just want attention, period, even if it's bad. We see that on reality shows, right?
Definitely.
And then the fourth group of people are what I call achievers, people who are looking for personal or financial success. They're obsessed with achievement, right? And then the last is the impact, and people who come into this world and they want to make an impact. They're far and few between. They're the Charles Hamilton Houstons. They're the Malcolm X's. They're the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s. They're the Thurgood Marshalls. Avon Williams. These are these people I call impact players. 85% of the people in the world fall into the first 3 categories: either comfort, acceptance, or recognition or prestige. 10% are achievers. And then the 5th are impact players, right? And, impact players are people who come to this world who are moved by impact, are kind of at the top of the food chain, but are far and few between, and are moved by something that typically they can't really explain.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they're the 5% of the people that are truly satisfied. In other words, most, there's this, for me, for example, there's this level of satisfaction. On one hand, you feel like you're a tortured soul, right? Because once you enter the arena of truly trying to make a difference in this world, then ultimately, you realize that you've committed yourself to something, and you're satisfied knowing that whether it's today, tomorrow, or 50 years from now, if you leave this world and you're in your final resting place, you've done your duty, right? Yeah. There's a sense of satisfaction because you understand the world. Yeah. I think it's a gift that some people have, that they understand that. Yeah. But the thing about everybody else is that everybody is chasing something, that they'll never be ultimately fulfilled because they're chasing something. And even when they get it, we see those people, like the achievers. We have people, how many billionaires do we know that committed suicide, or millionaires that commit suicide? These people are never happy, regardless of what you give them. But just to circle around to what you're saying as far as why people, are the way that they are, as far as, the system and people being, racist. And it is, again, it's not really, it's just a matter of inferiority, and they're fearful of who you will become.
I see.
Right? I don't believe, you do have people on the low level of the food chain, yes, that believe, those sort of things. But in the final analysis, I think that if they were, you have to, I think subconsciously there's the fear that what would happen if these individuals were actually put into a position of power.
Yeah.
And if the society, historically, if society flips, then will these people do to us what we did to them? Right? That's really what it boils down to. It's just a whole thing of, you don't let your foot off of someone's neck if you know if they're going to get up and they're going to kill you. You keep your foot on their neck. So I think that basically when you do so much dirt to people and you treat people so badly, the fear is that if I allow things to be fair and not be happy with their oppression and my perceived entitlement, then I would lose it.
I see.
See, people aren't moved by fairness.
Yes.
You know what I mean? The only time that people are concerned about fairness is when they treat it unfairly.
Of course.
How, do you see people marching for fairness when they are treated special? I mean, very seldom does that happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So the only time that people march against police brutality is when they can identify with police brutality. When people, march against the way that the justice system is being, treating people unjust, whether it's courts or whatever, they're touched by it in some way. You know what I mean? So you don't see, people striking with union workers unless they're family and friends of people in the union. And that's just unfortunate that we do not have people who care anything about justice except for themselves. And the reason why we have such a bad society and that humanity is in the condition that it's in is because we are selfish people.
Yes.
It's just outright selfishness. And it's just like, I was talking last week about the upcoming presidential elections on the show that we just did. And I was talking about the fact that, there's all kinds of buzz. I listen to all kinds of talk shows about the election, but not one conversation about who is a good person. You know what I'm saying? Who is going to treat the lowest man on the totem pole as good as the highest man on the totem pole? We're talking about strategy.
Yes.
We're talking about, why is it that we're more interested in the fact that someone went to Yale than we are about someone who basically, fought for his country?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, it's just like the President of the United States. People were not outraged about what he said about John McCain, he says that just because he had an issue with Judge McCain, he never gave him any kind of credit for the fact that, he says, my heroes don't get captured. I mean, you just think about that.
Yeah.
And we're cool with that. But at the same time, we're mad at Colin Kaepernick for taking a knee.
Of course.
So that kind of tells you exactly and he's critical of Colin Kaepernick for taking a knee.
Definitely.
Right? So you're going to be mad at this man for taking a knee, protesting against police brutality.
Yeah.
But you're going to be disrespectful to a man who spent years in a POW camp, who went through all kinds of torture.
Yeah.
So I think that when you begin to start understanding who we are, the hardest thing to do is to look at yourself.
Yeah.
And we don't look at ourselves as individuals. And so what happens is that basically, if you're able to look beyond that selfishness and you're able to go out in the world and you begin to start fighting for people, even when those individuals don't even appreciate the fact that you're fighting for them, whether they do or not, and not to mention the haters, because the haters come out of the woodwork, then, you have to deal with the repercussions of not being that 85%, the 95% of the people who go through their day not doing anything for nobody else except themselves.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with our politics.
Yeah, of course. It's interesting that you mention, how most people are in that 95%, and how throughout you mentioned different important figures of individuals who have purpose and have been attacked. And we have seen this throughout history with, different civil rights advocates like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and people of color who have been specifically targeted because of their purpose. As a public servant and as an activist, because you're not only an attorney, but you're also someone who's out there in the community and very involved.
Well, I think ultimately, my purpose is to touch as many people as I possibly can and make the biggest impact that I possibly can to, in somehow, some way, help make this world a better place, than it was when I got here. I remember when when I was a little kid, my grandmother used to have this saying, and I used to ask her, "Grandmama, what are you doing?" And she used to always reply, she used to say, "I'm writing my obituary. What are you going to say about me when I'm gone?" And I remember that, one of my favorite Mark Twain quotes was, he says that the two most important days in a man's life is when he's born and when he knows why he's born. And I felt like that when my grandmother passed, went to her funeral. Actually, I'd seen her the day before. And I remember this one particular day earlier when she had made that statement to me when I was a kid. And when she would say, "What are y'all going to say about me when I'm gone?" She would smile. She had a certain type of smile. Yeah. And I remember when she passed away, and the day before, she was actually in the hospital. And I remember we were talking. She seemed fine. And when I left the hospital, she smiled at me. And it seemed like, from my mind, it was the same smile that she would say when she would say, "What are you going to say about me?" Right? So when she passed away and we went to the graveyard, and, I could kind of feel that. Wow. Right? And the way I felt when she left this world, and because she was an extremely giving person. Yeah. Like her, she would give you everything that she had, if you needed it, right? And so, and the way she made me feel, and then the day when she passed away, the way she made me feel. And I always said that, that's what I want. I want to live my life in a way in which, when I'm in my final resting place, that my children, my wife, and my family and my friends feel the same way I felt on that day. And I always say I thank my grandmother for giving me the second most important day in my life, and that's what I feel like my purpose is from that moment on, my entire life changed. Wow. I mean, the things that I chose to do in life, the things, it was a pivotal point in my life. Yeah. That particular experience, being there, thinking of how I felt that day at the graveyard. Yeah. You see what I mean? Wow. So, it was her legacy that changed, my life. Yeah. And made me realize, that's really what I want to do, because that was the closest person who, other than my grandfather, that's the closest person who had passed away to me. Yeah. Right? And so, her legacy made me realize what life is all about. Because I never really thought much about death. Yeah. But at that moment, at that time, I felt like I knew what my purpose was. And I don't think I was ever fearful of death from that moment on. Wow. You know what I mean? I felt like, that I needed to get on this mad dash to make a difference. And, that's my legacy. That's my purpose. What's going to be my legacy? Is it going to be selfishness? And as, the great comedian Paul Mooney used to say, you've never seen a Brinks truck following a hearse, because you can't take any of those things with you. Yeah. And even when you leave money, most people squander it or fight over it. Yeah. Yeah. But when you leave goodness and you change people's lives, then you leave something that's lasting and that's going to benefit you in this world, and it's going to benefit you in the next world. And that's really how I'm moved. I wish I could give some sort of secular, prolific reason why I want to do that. But in the final analysis, that's really, what I want to do. I want that's what life is really all about.
Wow, and it's interesting how it all ties in because you talk about this purpose that's greater than yourself and how that in itself inspired you from your grandparents. And you can see your own purpose and you leaving your legacy with everything that you do in the community. You have the Stop and Frisk Academy where you talk to youth about, police encounters and all of that. You touch on that youth community. You talk on the radio to inform people about social justice issues that are prominent in their communities. You try to bring this jury reform initiative to light to really expose the flaws within the justice system. And it's really it's interesting how it all ties into that bigger purpose where you might not know it, but you are actively kind of doing this, expanding a greater purpose through everything that you do on your daily life. And that's amazing. And I'm sure that as a lawyer, you definitely see other lawyers who kind of have that sense of purpose as you do, but I'm sure you also see other lawyers who really don't.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting when in the profession, and just quickly, the way that specifically making my choice to go to law, become a lawyer. My grandfather, his name A.D. Reynolds, who as a little boy, I spent a lot of time watching him. I grew up in a single parent household, so my mother worked 2 jobs, and my grandfather was a janitor, and at night he would clean law offices. And this one attorney, he cleaned his law office. His name was Tyrus Cobb. And when I was a kid, maybe 7 or 8 years old, he took me in the law library. He introduced me to Attorney Cobb. And he said, "This is my grandson. He's going to be the next Avon Williams." Oh, wow. And that's when Attorney Cobb started telling me about Avon Williams and, Thurgood all these great lawyers who changed the world. Yeah. And so I left there thinking, that's what I wanted to do. Right. And then, of course, after my grandfather passed away he passed away when I was in the military. And later on, after that, I went to Chancery Court regarding the name change petition that I had filed. And when I walked in front of him, he was actually the presiding judge. He went from being Tyrus Cobb to being the chancellor judge. And he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet the next Avon Williams." Oh. And he started telling me about how great of a man my grandfather was. And, I became extremely emotional and left and went and, went to Tennessee State and enrolled and embarked on this journey to become a lawyer. But, the type of lawyers that, being from the South, lawyers were seen differently than they are today. When I was growing up, lawyers were people like Avon Williams, Z. Alexander Luby, Thurgood Marshall, all these great men who were trying to change the world, right? And it wasn't the money, because money was they were not known to be wealthy men. They were just known to be men who were willing to fight and stand up for people who could not stand up for themselves. And that's what I was raised to understand a lawyer to be. And Charles Hamilton Houston, who was the dean of Howard University Law School and the mentor to many great civil rights lawyers, one being Thurgood Marshall, who parroted the same statement that as a black lawyer, you're either a social parasite or you're a social engineer. And I believe that either, you can be a lawyer and do nothing except suck the life out of everything. It's just like now, I was watching a game show where they said that, what professions are known to be liars, and they said lawyer was number 1, right? Wow. And so, the idea of being a lawyer now is, I don't know if it's, it's different. I think it's more of a social parasite than the social engineer. And I believe that every lawyer who has the opportunity every day to actually touch other people and make a difference, some people don't feel like that's their obligation or their duty. Yeah. I just think that's where the profession went. And I don't think, and you have to ask yourself this question. There's a lot of Hispanic attorneys. Yeah. There's a lot of African-American attorneys. Yeah. There's a lot of attorneys of different walks of life. Yes. But considering that, many of what goes on in the justice system hasn't changed. How can so many people come from these communities and go out there and get involved, and you do not see a more expansive change? And it's because, again, if you're not willing to put it on the line, it doesn't really matter. If you are a Hispanic judge and you are the son of immigrants or the daughter of immigrants, and you become an immigration judge, what are you going to do to change things for people who are being mistreated, or an immigration system that seems to be unjust? What are you going to do? If you're going to sit on the bench and just be a face with a name that sounds Hispanic and everybody gives you awards and pats you on the back, then you really haven't done anything. If you're an African American who basically have come from the inner cities and understand, what it's like in many different cases, whether it's the inner city or anywhere else, and you sit up there and you have a robe and you get these awards and everybody says he's a black judge, but you don't see any changes, what does it matter? It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anything, because the system is the problem.
Of course.
And if you go along with the system and you don't do anything to make a change, then it's the same old thing. That's the reason why, it takes more than just being a face. And if you're not you can't just get into the system and just do your job. If you're, not making a change as a prosecutor, you know that they're mistreating people. You know that their judicial discretion is not really good as far as determining who's going to be prosecuted or the type of sentence that's going out. What are you going to do? If you're going to get up every day, get your paycheck, and be a face, it's really not going to matter. The same thing with being police officers. There's been police officers, Black African-American police officers, who have been involved in corruption, who've been involved in abusing individuals, and are present when it happens. But if you're not going to do something from within the system to make a change, then it doesn't really matter. So that's where I say that basically, if you're going to do it and you're going to have to, they're going to come after you. You know what I mean? And if you're not ready for that, then you're not going to make a change. Nobody goes, if you're not doing anything, it's just like the legislators. Like some of those legislators right now who are getting a lot of backlash, why are they getting just recognition, or are they really making a change? Right? Whether you're talking about what do they call them now? The big four, right? Or whatever they call them. That's part of it. What's going to happen? Are they going to, there's consequences. There's cost. There's no, unless you're just going to go to your box and just do what you're supposed to, then whatever. It's just like Clarence Thomas is a Supreme Court judge. Now, is there anything that he's done in that position that's changed the lives of people of color?
When we talk about cost and consequences of people, attorneys and public officials, what are the specific kind of repercussions that an attorney or a public defender or anyone in the justice system can face for going outside the law or using the law for the benefit of the client?
Well, I think that especially those who are actually, employed like a public defender or a prosecutor, then the issue is employment. Obviously, they can put pressure on your employer to terminate you. You could lose, your job if you're not playing ball. Because you can always the whole idea about human beings is that, at my age, the one thing that I've realized is that everybody makes mistakes, and sometimes mistakes can be very subjective. Just because that's why they call it the practice of law. Because basically there is people kind of think about the law as being this really black and white, situation where you can, this is wrong, the law says this, the law, that's how that's how most people see it.
Yeah.
But the thing about the law is that it's extremely ambiguous. That's why when you look at court decisions, Supreme Court decisions, and they always talk about, what type of decision was it? 5-4, was it 6-3, was it 7-2? Because you have to ask yourself this question: if there's an issue of law and fact presented to 9 individuals, and the ruling is not equal, right? You have a dissenting opinion who completely disagree with everybody else, and you have the majority opinion.
Yeah.
So that teaches you what is the law. Who is to say that the dissenting opinion is better than the majority?
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And the reason why that's the law. So what if you file something or pursue something that is seen by the justices as the minority view, right? Then as an attorney, someone can say you made the wrong decision. That wasn't the right decision. And everything that you do, because the way that the law uses words like reasonable, right, intentional, and obviously you can't go inside someone's mind to make a determination as to what's reasonable or intentional. Or when we talk about the issue of due process, or when we talk about the issue of juries, right? I'm of the opinion that if you have an individual who happens to be African American and the entire jury pool is white, you got a problem with whether that is a fair jury.
Yeah.
But I think I'm right, right? I think that I'm right about that.
Yeah.
But you have someone else, and apparently just about everyone else, that hasn't flown. You can't say because there's no white people on the jury that this black man cannot get a fair and impartial jury. There's people who believe that. And so, when you talk about the issue of consequences, then it goes back to the whole idea that as an attorney and you're practicing law and you're fighting for certain things, your decisions, everything is a risk. Because every time you pursue something, there's going to be you're going to lose. Somebody's going to lose.
Yeah.
And if you lose, like Johnny Cochran lost Geronimo Pratt's trial. Of course, 20 years later, he won the appeal, but does that make him a bad lawyer? You know what I mean? Or if he tries to do, or let's just say his aggressive manner in which to try to get that appeal, get that conviction overturned, could that be seen as someone who is doing something frivolous? You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Everything in the law is open for, scrutiny in a way based upon how you see it.
Yes.
You can do something in a way in which, you could do something that you think in your mind is okay and could be completely against the law.
Yeah.
So the point is that when it's easy to to fall into a trap, even when you're doing things the way you're supposed to, and even within the system. Once they want to come after you, then they can come after you. And oftentimes it could be something as simple as saying, Your Honor, like, for example, the way that Barry Scheck talked to Judge Ito in the O.J. Simpson case. Someone could say, I don't like the way you're talking to me. I'm going to sanction you. I think that you're being disrespectful. Or you may have someone who pursues an action based upon their interpretation of the law.
Yeah.
And the courts could sanction that person. Or any of those things, the filings that you do, or mistakes that it's just one of those things, or like even for your, in some of these immigration cases where someone is seeking asylum, there's been people who have found to have, they could say you filed a frivolous claim. because he's from Peru, and nobody from Peru is scared to go back to Peru, or nobody's scared to go. You know, it's so vast, and one person ruling can make that difference. Or you could be like, for example, with Brown v. Board of Education. The mere filing of Brown v. Board of Education could have been seen as frivolous, right? Let's think about Dred Scott, where the United States Supreme Court said that you could not file a lawsuit because an African American is not a human being. The Supreme Court said that. Yeah. So anytime that you filed a lawsuit on behalf of an African American after the ruling in Brown after the ruling in Dred Scott, could have been a frivolous, right? Yeah. And he could have been sanctioned. He could have been suspended. You could have been disbarred because you're fighting for something that the court got wrong. Wow. Right? Yeah. So that's the thing, is that if the courts get it right all the time, there's no need for lawyers. Yeah. Right? You don't need a lawyer if the courts got it right. Yeah. The only reason you need lawyers is because the courts get it wrong all the time. Yeah. Right? And so if the courts are getting things wrong, then you got to say that the court's wrong. Yeah. Or you might have to tell the judge that he's making a bad decision. You know what I mean? And so that is, it's almost like slavery was legal. Yeah. Not allowing black people to vote was legal. Jim Crow was legal. Mm-hmm. All of these things that people, that our country has done had been co-signed by the judicial branch, meaning that it was legal. And so what are you supposed to then? Just imagine if we lived in a society where we accepted what the court said. With, Plessy versus Ferguson, that's the law of the land. That meant separate but equal. Jim Crow was okay. You could do that. Yeah. And so if you don't challenge it, then you're up against something. It could, and the only reason is the politics of the day. Yeah. You see what I mean? So in other words, there could have been time where someone would have said, no, that's not a righteous claim. Your argument, we've already said that. We've already said that, like, for example, even the people fighting that want to overturn Roe v. Wade. Is that frivolous? I mean, I think that the court got it right. But the mere argument against it, and if the courts are always right, why are you fighting it? Wow. You see what I mean? So that's what makes the law this whole thing where it's about politics. So if you're going against the grain, and you have to go against the grain because the courts get it wrong all the time. Yeah. And when you do that, that's what happens. I mean, if you're making this big splash, they have to get rid of you, or they're going to try to get rid of you, or discourage you. Do you want to be the big bad guy that's able to go into courts and be able to argue things for people who are being mistreated? That's not what they want. They want you to be quiet and conform. So if you're being quiet and you conform, then they don't have to worry about you. That means that they get to rule and do things the way that they want to. Yeah. And then when you begin to start not being quiet, I'm going to fight against it, they don't like that. I mean, who goes out fighting for things and nobody comes after them? You see what I mean? Sure. So that's the thing. I mean, when you make noise, so most people go in and they tuck their tail and they bow their head and, they treat the sometimes I've represented veterans that have got injured in war, right? And he's being judged. He is being scrutinized by a judge who never fought in a war, a prosecutor who's never fought in a war. Everybody, the clerk, nobody in that courtroom has sacrificed more than the guy that's being accused of the crime. But yet and still, he has to give respect to the judge. Wow. Because he wears a robe. right?
Yeah.
That means if you go to an Ivy League school, you get a law degree, you go, it doesn't matter whether you do court work, litigation work, but you know the right people, you're appointed to the bench, and you wear a robe, that means that you have the right to make decisions over people's lives, no matter who you are. Now, you don't think that that's going to bump heads with somebody else. I mean, that's typically how people get appointed. I mean, they run for office, in some places, but oftentimes they get appointed as well. So that's another thing. Because I ran for office and I got appointed to this judgeship, that gives me the right to, it's politics.
Yeah.
That's really what it is. So you have the right to make these laws and determine fairness. When the way you got into office, does that mean that you're qualified to do that? That to make those kind of decisions over somebody's life? So, we don't question that.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's consequences when you do. And there's dire consequences. And that's the reason why our judicial system and our system is, ineffective. That's why so many innocent people are convicted for things that they didn't do. That's why that people are overcharged. Yeah. That's why you see these prosecutors who are being caught hiding evidence. I seen an interpreter in court the other day who was telling me a story about when they started, and they happened to ask the prosecutor, do you think this guy is guilty? And the response was, are you kidding me? This is Orange County. It don't matter whether he's guilty or not. All I had, the jury's going to convict him regardless.
Oh, wow.
And so you have people who are 25, 26, 27, 28 years old or older who have given that type of power over other individuals. And, they don't care about humanity.
Yeah.
They don't, there's not a discussion about humanity. I've had situations where victims have come and said they lied. And literally have prosecutors say, well, in light of the fact that the victim had actually he's done something before, I think I could still get a conviction. You see what I mean? So that's what you're dealing with, and when you're fighting against something like that, you're going to make enemies, and people are going to try to take you out.
Yeah. Wow. It's almost exasperating to hear that as a lawyer and as an attorney who's trying to fight for justice, you are still on the line of, being unemployed or being sanctioned or being, upheld to these unfair consequences by the courts because you're not being that officer that caters to the needs of that system.
Right.
And I guess my question is, as somebody who is really willing to take the consequences and what comes with fighting for justice, what is your advice? What is your hope for the future, especially with this current, administration and this current political system?
Well, I mean, man, my hope is that people, somehow, some way become a little bit more, not a little bit more, but a whole lot less selfish.
Yeah.
I think that basically, we're entering a time period where, sometimes I feel like our time is running out. And I feel like that basically, we've become so complacent that we feel like that there's not going to be any consequences to all the dirt that we've done.
Yeah.
And we've been given ample opportunity to address the dirt that we've done. And ultimately, we can pay for that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I truly believe that one day, somehow, some way, it's just like, it's not like we're the first nation that felt that we were powerful than everybody else. And history teaches us that, every powerful superpower has ultimately, you know, lost their title.
Yes.
And I think that now we've been given chance after chance after chance to make amends for the things that we've done. And if we continue to avoid, our opportunity to, be a better nation and make up. I mean, you look at it like this. We charge people and hold people to standards that we don't hold our own nation to. We will not allow people to do things and make amends for things that we've done ourselves.
Yeah.
We talk about, even prosecutors, or we are very. That's how we feel like we can solve every problem, is make a law and prosecute people, and hold. We're always trying to prosecute people for making mistakes.
Yes.
And I think that but we don't look at ourselves as a nation. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's just like, how can you tell me that you have to pay for this? All these people, whether you're talking about children, sex trafficking or trafficking children, or, it amazes me because we feel, people are outraged with that type of a crime.
Yeah.
But to think that that's how we became a nation,
Yeah.
trafficking human beings,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But nobody looks at it that way. Or families that were split up, people that were raping, women on these plantations who were probably children.
Yeah.
Crimes, like crimes to humanity that could not be met by any other place. But that is what it is. I believe in forgiveness and redemption.
Yeah.
And we are a nation that we're always talking about people taking responsibility for their actions. And I think until we begin to start taking responsibilities for our own actions, then I think that ultimately it could be our undoing.
Yeah.
That's my fear. And I think that people aren't listening.
Yes.
I've never, we feel like, nothing could ever go wrong. We have a strong military. We have a great economy. We're the strongest nation in the world. But we are oppressing people and still today separating children
Yes.
from their parents in 2019 and putting children in cages and mentally destroying, and in some cases physically destroying children, and not one peep, not one thing. You don't hear a country outraged. That should be literally impossible in 2019. That there's no way. I mean, when it comes to a child being separated from their parents sanctioned by the government,
Yeah.
should be something that that kind of sets. If you want to know where we are as a society, that you go to the border and you go to the prisons, and you'll know what type of society that you're in.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that until we begin to start looking at ourselves and caring about other people other than ourselves, before it's too late, then I think that I believe that we're going to perish, literally.
Yeah.
That we will lose, because it's just, that's the way the world works. And then we've been blessed by given an opportunity to make amends, and we didn't do it.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, we're at this point in history where it's kind of scary to think about everything that's going on and how people are still being oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
And with that in mind, how can the average person contribute to this change?
Yeah. Well, I think that we need to, and I keep going back to this whole idea of about not being selfish.
Yeah.
I think that we have to begin to start. The average individual has to begin to start trying to understand uh, their fellow man. I mean, we're so quick to judge other people,
Yes.
without really truly trying to understand. Some of the people with some of the highest degrees at some of the most prestigious institutions, you know, tend to be some of the most ignorant people that we know, just simply because they castigate and think certain things are, a certain way. I mean, they're very stereotypical, and we throw people into certain groups, and that's just that's our form of training in our country. But I think that my advice is to stop being trained and focus on being educated, right? So these institutions, the perfect word is when someone says that they've been trained at an Ivy League school. For example, I'm Harvard trained, or I was trained at Berkeley, and training is a perfect thing.
Yeah.
But I think that we have to begin to start thinking beyond these, social, economic, political paradigms that we kind of box ourselves into.
Yeah.
And because we do that, we don't think for ourselves, right? So it's just like, for example, when we think about you know, and I hate to keep going back to our commander in chief, but let's just say, we talk about the president and Trump and some of the things that he says, and that many of his followers are going to, blindly do what he says or follow him regardless.
Yes.
And I think that we have to begin to start, and you have to ask yourself this question too. And again, this is kind of, again, and I don't want to be so completely negative, but he tapped into a sentiment in this country that was, was brewing.
Yeah.
He did not create it. He just, recognized it, exploited it, and now, he kind of give those people or kind of motivate those individuals to come out and do some of the things that they would normally potentially would not do,
Yes.
because that is, a degree of hatred for your fellow man.
Yeah.
And I think that when you have a degree of hatred for another human being, when you have absolutely don't know anything about them based upon the color of their skin. And one of the things that I do want to be clear about is that it's not just white people.
Yeah.
Hatred and this whole thing, the question is, I mean, we see other individuals that come into this country from other places that harness that same type of sentiment,
Yes.
even towards African Americans.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you ask yourself, it's a human problem, but clearly in this country, it's driven by this whole idea of European supremacy, and basically, the European supremacy is a misnomer, because it isn't because they feel they superior. It is, a degree of inferiority, a significant degree of inferiority, why someone would mistreat another person that they deem in their head incapable of being able to do anything. So you would not have to go out of your way to oppress people unless you were fearful that they may rise. And I think that what happens is that there's a sense of entitlement that we have as human beings, and anything that would, in order for you to be entitled in the United States, you have to in some way align yourself with that supremacy ideology.
Yeah.
Right? So in other words, when people come to the United States and supremacy is somewhat in their mind seen as a matter of entitlement, then when people relate to that particular group, then it's more of an avoidance. They have to act this way.
Yeah.
Because if I can identify with these people, then they will not look at me and see who I really am, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, but I think until we begin to change the way we are as human beings and begin to start thinking more of our fellow human beings, not just for some, prop for TV or, we talk about it, but we're not really, that's not who we are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, and so we just need to figure out ourselves and ways of making this world better by touching other people, figuring out if there's somebody else that I can touch, that I can feel. I don't, that's the other, the one question is that as human beings, what makes us so judgmental and love the opportunity to, to disrespect and to do bad things to somebody else. I mean, literally, then there's people that could see a wounded dog and feel worse than they could a wounded man in the street.
True.
That's the kind of society we live in. And the question is, how did, is that just who we are? How do we get out of that? And in many ways, I really don't have the answer, because if I could change hearts, then I would.
Yeah.
But I think that sometimes when you do good things for people, then sometimes it does change people's hearts. So I think the more people who are willing to do good to other people, then maybe we can change, one heart at a time, and maybe we can, save our nation. Yeah. Otherwise, I feel like, I've seen, we got homeless veterans, right?
Yeah.
So a nation that loves this country, loves this, its freedom, and love the men and women who fight for it, and we don't even take care of those people. So, that's it. That tells an entire story.
Yeah. With that in mind, we're getting ready to close. Thank you so much, Mr. Ali, for lending us your time. We look forward to having you tune in to our Sunday broadcast. For further information, log in to justicewatchradio.com. Thank you so much for tuning in.